Okay. Again, everyone, thank you for being here and good morning. Today, we're going to be, Charlie is going to be talking about costing recipes for CPG, consumer packaged good. If you are here, it's because you have a product and you are trying to figure out a lot of things. So a little bit of background about Charlie. I'm just gonna do a brief intro and you, Charlie, can expand a little more.
Thank you.
Charlie has been, if I'm not mistaken, with the program almost since the beginning. He's been advisor and also a presenter. Right now, he is one of our presenters, specializes in CPG brands. He is the co-founder of Element Scrub, non-alcoholic beverage mix. Right, Charlie? I'm not.
Yes, correct. I'm just grabbing
Yes.
this.
There you go. And then also he is the co-owner, co-founder of a bar in DC. I'm going to pass it on to you, Charlie, so you can expand a little bit more about that. Let me know when you want me to go to the next slide. And I'm going to be checking up the chat in case you guys have any questions in the middle of the presentation.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Maybelline. It's great to see you and great to meet all of you for the first time. Feel free to, if you don't mind, in the chat, just tell me your name and tell me your company as well, just so I can reference that if you guys have questions in the future. Yeah, so as Maybelline said, I've been running Element Shrub for the last 10 years. We make a non-alcoholic apple cider vinegar mixer. We also launched a ready-to-drink product at one point. So my foundation is in beverage mostly, but I've also recently opened a bar in Georgetown in DC. And I also do consulting. I work for a woman named Ali Ball, who is a former buyer at Buy Right in San Francisco. And she and I work together on a digital course called Retail Ready. And we support brands that are kind of in this stage from going to farmers market to getting more wholesale accounts. And so I run the product side of her business as well. So yeah, so I'm excited to be here, and I am excited to talk about pricing, talk about cost of goods sold, and kind of just thinking about the basics here of costing recipes. I know many founders understand this, but I think there's definitely some nuance to it, and then I also like to talk a little bit about pricing strategy. So cost is like what everything costs you, but price is what you sell it to other people for, and thinking about sort of the future of not just selling at farmers markets, but selling to retailers, selling through distributors, selling to food service, and be able to answer questions that you guys have about who takes a cut along the way, how much they take, so that you can plan accordingly. All right, Maybelline, let's keep going here on the slides. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. We can just kind of talk through the basics here, but I think the first thing, it seems really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times I've seen brands not know the answer to this, but really, like, are you able to sell your product for more than it costs to make it? And there's a difference between selling your product for more than it costs to make it at a farmer's market versus selling your product for more than it costs to make it to a distributor. And so as we think about expanding our brand and our business, making sure that we are setting ourselves up for success at the beginning and knowing what to expect when we want to go sell to Whole Foods, national or regional or whoever it is, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about this. Maybelline, let's keep going here. So then sometimes I get some questions about what I should include in my cost of goods sold, what I should not include. And so I definitely want to dig into that a little bit. And if you guys have questions, I'll also say just throughout all of this, feel free to chime in the chat if you have a question about something. I want to make sure that I'm not just talking at you the whole time and that you guys are getting exactly what you want out of this. So, Jody, I just want to answer your question. Buy right. So buy right is it's actually spelled like this in the chat. It's an independent grocery store in San Francisco, and she was like a grocery buyer for them. She's not a buyer for them anymore, but oh, I guess, sorry, Caesar, I think I just sent that to you only. There we go. But the name of the company is Food Biz Wiz. I'll put it in the chat as well. And so we do a 90-day program, and yeah, I can talk more about that too if you guys have questions. But let's dig into the cost of goods sold piece. I guess before I jump into this too, in the chat, let me know if this is how comfortable you guys are on a scale from, I don't know, 1 to 4 of knowing, like being really confident in knowing exactly how much your product costs and knowing how much each SKU costs. I'm just curious because if everybody is at like, I'm a 4, I'm super confident, we can talk about pricing instead, or I'll just sort of talk high level. Okay, 2, 2, 2.5, 5, great. Okay, so Francois, just bear with me for as we talk through some of the basics that you might already be familiar with. Okay, Maybelline, let's keep going here. Okay, so first thing is converting your recipe to a common unit so you can figure out your cost per recipe and your cost per unit. And then we're going to talk about 3 things that I think brands often forget to include, which is sort of shipping, spoilage, and then finally, we're going to just sort of calculate your ingredient cost per ounce or per unit, and then we're going to add everything up, and you'll have your cost of goods sold. All right, Maybelline, you don't mind. So the first thing you guys are going to need to do, and again, this might seem super obvious, but you need to source your ingredients from a reputable source. You want this source obviously to be consistent as well. So somewhere that you can go back to every time and get it for the same price, or have a good sense of how much it's going to cost every time you purchase it again. And what I like to do at the very beginning is, if you have never sort of gone through this exercise before, is to sort of go around to a couple of stores, see how much the cost is per unit. And this is actually a very old slide. Costco does not sell sugar for $21.99 at 50 pounds anymore. But when you're thinking about the source that you are purchasing things from, you want to consider how much time, both in hours, it's going to take to get the product to you, and then how much it's going to cost to get the product to you, whether that's shipping, whether that's driving 4 hours to go pick it up, whatever it is, because you're going to need to account for that time and cost in your cost of goods sold, or think about how you're going to scale that in the future. Are you always going to be able to drive to a local farm to pick up strawberries or whatever it is to use in your product? And if not, how can you find another source to get those reliably every time? Okay, any questions on sort of sourcing your ingredients, or kind of understanding how to convert them from the price that you purchase them in the store to the cost of your recipe? Jody, good question. Is there a calculator for that online? So there's not necessarily a calculator, but ideally what you want to do, and Maybelline, you can keep going to the next slide, and that might help us. Let's see. Next one. So, oh, sorry, back one. Okay, so here, what you basically need to do is convert everything to a single unit, whether that's grams or ounces. So if you're buying liquid ingredients, you're going to want to weigh them so that you have the same weight for your water, for your oil, as you do for your sugar or fruit or whatever else it is that you're using, so that you have a consistent unit for each, for all of your ingredients, all of your, I'll call them your like soft ingredients, not your bottles and your packaging and your things like that, but all of the food ingredients that you're putting into your product, you all want those to be measured in grams, for example, but you might purchase them in pounds or you might purchase them in gallons. So you just need to convert whatever it is you purchase them in to whatever it is you are using them in your recipe. That makes sense. Yeah, and so whether that's initially you're going to measure it. I mean, most of the time when we create recipes for our products, we do them in batches, right? So we'll make like a dozen cookies, or so you will eventually convert it to a cost per unit, but initially it might be my batch costs this much and I get 12 units from that batch. So my unit cost is batch cost divided by 12. If that makes sense. All right, let's keep going.
Do you want me to go back or go forward?
Let's go forward. I think we're good. One more. Forward. Okay, so let's talk about these. I call them the 3 S's that you often, I often see brands forget to include these in their cost of goods sold, or they think about them, they know they exist, they don't actually put the math in to calculate it. Next one, Maybelline. So these 3 S's are spoilage. So how much of your ingredients are you actually able to use? Shrinkage or loss in your recipe. So if you make a recipe or like a batch, can you always sell 100% of whatever that recipe is? And then shipping and taxes, right? So if you're ordering products from Amazon, no shipping costs maybe, but if you're ordering them from somewhere else and there's a shipping cost, you have to make sure you're including that cost of shipping into your cost of goods sold as well to get it from wherever the manufacturer is to the facility where you are making it. The other thing that I will also throw in here as another F is, and there's some nuance to it, but thinking about the cost of storage as well of some of these ingredients. So let's talk about spoilage first. So this is sort of, I think about this as waste, how much of your ingredients you actually use. So if we go back to the example of sugar, you have a 50-pound bag of sugar. When you take that into the production facility and you use it, are you able to get all 50 pounds of sugar out of that bag and be able to use it? Do you spill a pound on the floor every time? If we're thinking about like ketchup bottles or other containers that are squeeze bottles, there's always like a little bit left in that thing. So you're paying for 10 ounces, let's say, but you actually only get 9 ounces out of it. So you just need to consider, if you're paying, just easy math here, like $10 for a 10-ounce container of ketchup, but you only get 9 ounces, well, it's no longer $1 an ounce if you can only get 9 ounces out of it, right? So it's more like $1.10. So you want to consider that in your cost of goods sold, to just show the reality of what's going on there. Shrinkage loss. So this doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. But for example, if you are making cookies and your batch size makes 12 and a half cookies, you can only sell 12 of those cookies, for example. Or in the beverage world, if you're running your product through through like a canning line or a bottling line, usually there's 6 or 7 gallons of product that are sort of left over in the machine that you can't use, and so that sort of loss that you're not able to sell. And so it's really important to remember that, hey, this is 7 gallons of product I can't use, so instead of being able to sell 100 units, I can only sell 95 or 93. And then with shipping and taxes, as I mentioned, and this comes down to sort of the reliable source. Where can you get things from where your shipping cost is reasonable, or the cost of driving out there or paying somebody to drive out there to pick up whatever it is you need. And also thinking about it from a perspective of, okay, well, if I had to make 10,000 units of this, what would that look like from a shipping perspective, and how could I decrease my cost of shipping or labor cost related to picking up the product that way. So from a numbers perspective, I think the easiest way to figure this out is to just, when you do production once, just kind of go through and be really meticulous about sort of measuring some of these things, and maybe do it once a quarter, depending on how often you're doing production, but maybe once every 3 times you do production. And if you have 3 data points, that's probably good enough to give you a sense of the percentage of spoilage or shrinkage or loss that you're getting from your product. But I think in general, 5% is a good sort of conservative number that that you can use. So for example, you get a 95% yield on all of your ingredients. Is probably a sort of safe bet, knowing that it might be plus or minus depending on the ingredients that you're using. And then I also mentioned storage here. I think storage is something that's often overlooked from a cost perspective, especially if you are, depending on how much product you're making at a time. In the beverage world, I had to make 18 pallets of soda that I then had to store in a storage facility. And at the beginning, I wasn't sure how quickly I would sell through that product. And so I needed to take into account the cost of storing that product, which is not free. And it's usually $50 to $100 per pallet per month, right? Which can add up pretty quickly if you're not selling through it. And so it's just important to think about, okay, well, as we scale and as we grow, I might be able to bring my unit cost down if I make a ton of product, but then I also need to consider the cost of storage as well, to make sure that I'm not just storing something forever and then it's going bad and I can't use it, or I'm storing it and it costs money and I'm going to cycle through it and I'm going to continuously have product because I need to continuously make more product. So any questions on these? Awesome. Okay, maybe let's keep going. Okay, so Jody, you asked about a calculator. Here's my version of a calculator here. So if we go back to the sugar as an example, converting it from sort of purchase unit to cost per unit in your recipe, you're taking the actual cost of the product plus the shipping, figuring out the per ounce cost of the purchase, and then you're converting that to, let's say you use 4 ounces in your recipe. Then as you can see here, I've said you have a 10 muffins in a recipe, for example, and then so your total cost for sugar per unit would be 2 cents. And then you're going to need to do that for all of your other ingredients like the flour and the carrots or whatever else you are putting in your product. And then with each of those ingredients, you're going to have a yield. So whether that's the sugar has a 95% yield, you're going to want to take that into account as well, which we've done here with the SSS equals 5%. So, okay. So that's all of the ingredient costing, sort of taking your raw ingredients, purchasing them, converting them to your unit cost, adding them up, thinking about the spoilage, thinking about the shipping costs, thinking about all of that. Then you also have your hard goods, which is whatever you package your product in, whether that's a bottle or I don't know, a package like this. And so you're going to want to consider all of the same things with your hard goods as you do with your soft goods. But instead of it being sort of like a recipe, it's your cost per item. So that's the cost per bottle, the cost per label. Thinking about the extra label that you need to put on the outside of the box when you're delivering it to the wholesale account. Thinking about spreading the cost of the box that you are packing your items in between the number of units that you pack in that box. So if you pack 6 items to a box and the box costs $6, right, then you need to add $1 per unit to your cost of goods sold to account for the actual box that you're giving to the retailer. And so some of these hard packaged goods are it's like a box or something where you're spreading the cost of that box over all of the units that you're shipping it in. Another thing to think about too is if you are going to be selling into wholesale accounts and you need to be giving away samples of things, you can think about spreading the cost of that sample over, say, a case of goods. So for example, if you sell, well, if your case is 12 units, but you know that every time you sell a case of product, you give away 1 sample of the same size. Well, then if you know that happens every time, then you might as well, divide, you might as well think that, hey, it actually costs me 13 units of product to sell 12 units every time. So you're gonna take your cost per unit and you're going to multiply it by 13 and you're going to divide it by 12 to get your true cost of cost per unit, because you know that every time you sell a case, you're also giving away a sample. And you're going to want to take into account the really some of the overhead, the operational office expense kind of things like tape and making sure you're doing the date stamp. Like those things are like pennies, but they add up and they come into play too with your cash flow in general. So you just want to make sure that you're taking those into account. Any questions on hard goods? Tell me, how do you guys package your products right now? What kind of like containers is everything in? And are you guys comfortable with sort of your hard good costs? I think something also here, shipping is a really big factor with hard goods. So for example, when you're ordering things from Uline, the shipping cost is like super expensive relative to the cost of the good. So considering using Amazon or Staples or some other way to get your product to you where the shipping cost isn't so so intense. Okay, Mylar bags, ramekins box, got it. Okay, cool. Okay, so cookies themselves, I have a seal. Got it. Okay, so there's both. So then in your case, right, you need to take into account the cost of the Mylar bags per cookie. So that's like a unit cost. And then the cost of the box is spread out over how many cookies fit in that box. Cool. Yes, and the ties and the packaging and the cards. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can, and the cards definitely can add up. I know we used to do a recipe card for each flavor, and it ended up being like a pretty significant like cost per unit. I mean, I think when it comes to printing, no matter where you print it, your price per unit is always going to be relatively high if you're printing fewer units. Um, so I think for what I would encourage you to think about is how can you minimize the number of like pieces of paper that you're printing, or how can you create um, a way so that you only have to print one thing, like one recipe book or one card that has multiple recipes on it. I will say in general for printing for like paper things, like we print a thank you card that we put in all of our online orders. I honestly I just use Vistaprint for that. But for labels, I depending on how many labels I'm printing, if it's just sort of a small number for a small batch, I use, I'll put it in the chat here. Okay, yeah. So printing in the hundreds, it's definitely going to be still a relatively higher, I think, cost per unit in general. For labels, lightning label, like for like this kind of label, lightning labels is really great because there's no die line fee. I mean, once you work with a small printer and you're consistently working with them, they'll charge like initially they'll charge you like a die line fee, which can be anywhere from like $500 to $1,000 just to like get started per unit. But what I like per SKU or size, what I like about lightning labels is they have tons of different sizes that you can choose from, and there's no die line fee, and they always have like a 5, 10, 15% coupon going on at some point, and they ship UPS ground for free. So as long as you plan, 5 days in advance and you don't need stuff overnighted, they're really good. You can, the other thing I like about lightning labels is you can go and you can get a quote based on how many units you need, and they return the quote within seconds. So source for food appropriate labels. So labels that we use on here are, the material is, we use a white bop mat. The white bop is like a waterproof resistant material that we use for beverage so that it doesn't get destroyed when it gets wet. For boxes, if you're thinking about, I think there's a couple of options here. There's, I guess I think of like two different kinds of boxes. One is like a shipping box where, but you mean like a gift box. So one thing, and again, depending on how customized you need it, in terms of shape or sort of partitions within the box, you might try. Let me see if this is still the name of it. So these guys have a pretty good, what I really like about Packlane too is you can order like 10 boxes. You're going to have a high minimum or a high price per unit, but a lot of these like bigger box companies that are not just like online like this have really high minimums in order to like make the price make sense for you. And here, if you can create like either a custom shipping box and gift set sort of in the same box, or you could do both. But I always encourage brands to not over order at the beginning, because one, the storage cost is really high, and two, you're always going to change something later about the box, most likely. And so don't put yourself in a position where you feel like, oh, I need to go through like 1,000 boxes before I can like make any changes. Oh, great. Okay. So if you know you're not going to make any changes on it, then yeah, go and print it, and know that you're going to print, whatever cookies you put on that box. Like, you can make it either as generic or as specific as you feel like you want to. But I like Packlane for their ability to do small quantities, which can be super helpful for cash flow. And you can customize inside and outside, so you can make it a really cool like unboxing experience. We have, and I'll just put this in the chat, this is what our gift box, let's see. So we have a gift set that looks like this. I just put the link in the chat. It's fits 3 8-ounce Boston Round bottles. It has a partition in the middle that comes in and out that is that doubles as a recipe card. And just to give you a sense of pricing, this was including shipping. I had the minimum order that made the most sense was 2,500 units, and it was about $2.78 per box, including the partition. But this was totally like custom that we did for us, and then we got to design the inside and the outside. So, but then that is $2.78 divided by 3 from a cost per unit perspective. So not crazy when your product, we sell the set for $40. So as long as you have a relatively high price for the gift set, you can usually get away with doing that if you have the cash to manage the upfront cost. Okay. Any other questions on hard packaging or hard goods? All right. Maybelline, let's keep going here. Okay, yep, we talked about this. Okay, so I think labor cost is probably the most complicated thing to calculate, and something that I think at the beginning a lot of brands ignore or just say, hey, I'm not paying myself, I'm making the product myself, so my labor cost is zero. And I really encourage you to ideally not not do that, and to step back and think, if I was not around to make my product, who would I have to hire to make it, and how much would I have to pay them to make it? Because now it may be that you know that you are never going to outsource the production of your product to somebody else. And even if you keep production in-house, you are likely going to pass on the responsibility of making the product to somebody else other than you, sort of the founder of the business. And so thinking about and making sure you include, I've listed some questions here that I get from brands a lot, which is, should I include the time it takes to set up and clean up? Yes, because that is time you would have to pay somebody else to do as well, right? You can't just leave your kitchen a mess for the next person to show up, especially if you're using a shared space. How do I know how much labor should be if I make the product myself? Well, here's where I'd, again, step back and think about the opportunity cost, which is like, okay, well, if I have to hire somebody to do this, I have to pay them $20 an hour. If you're making it yourself, then consider the labor cost $20 an hour, even if that's not your sort of like founder salary rate. And in terms of the formula for calculating labor, the formula is relatively simple. Figuring out how much time it actually takes to make your product can be the more complicated factor. But basically, number of hours times the hourly rate divided by the number of units that you can make during that time. And so depending on the process, right? Right. Okay. So this is a good example. We make freeze dried candy. How do we calculate the cost of the machine running? Some batches run 3 hours and some run up to 12 hours. So let me ask you this: can you do other things while the machine is running, or do you just have to like sit around and like twiddle your thumbs and kind of like wait till it's done? You can label bags. Got it. Okay. Great. So then I think thinking about the process from start to finish, right? Right, or preparing for the next batch. So I think here, what in an ideal situation, you want to think about, okay, I'm starting from zero, from like all my ingredients are like here at the facility, ready to produce. From that point until my product is bagged and packaged and ready to sell, like however long it takes to get to that point is how much time from a labor perspective you need to sort of account for. I will say I would potentially draw the line at there's a difference between sort of like, let's say this bottle is labeled and ready to sell, but if I'm going to if somebody purchases it online, I have to wrap it up and put it in a box and ship it out. That cost is only applicable to my direct to consumer cost of goods sold, whereas the state that it's in right now is applicable to my wholesale cost. We run the 12-hour batches at night in our home. Okay, so in that case, I would say you don't need to consider that 12-hour time as part of your labor. The only thing that I would think about is, again, depending on how what your plans are for the future. If I don't know if you've ever talked to a co-packer or somebody else, but the only thing the two things you'll want to think about is your turnaround time on this, just less about labor and more just about, setting expectations that you can't have product ready in 2 hours, and that you need to give them 2 or 3 days notice or however long you need. And then also, if you were to go to a co-packer in the future, and this is always why considering the cost of labor is really important from the beginning, is that as you scale, you're either going to need to pay somebody to make your product, whether that's in-house or through a co-packer, and the co-packer is going to charge you $1.50 a unit, whatever it is, and you want to make sure that you don't go from thinking your cost of goods sold is $2 to the co-packer saying, well, now your cost of goods sold is $4.50, and you were selling it for $5 before, thinking like, oh, we're good because I'm making $3 a unit, and now you're making 50 cents a unit. So really being honest with yourself about what that labor cost is, so that there's no shock later on when you have to kind of scale production. Jody, just looking at your note here, I'm working with a co-packer, small co-packer, and my cookies need to dry overnight. So we're talking a 2-day process. Do you have a small scale co-packer that also includes shipping to wholesale clients? So I would say most co-packers do not do the sort of like third-party logistics side of it. And are your products, I assume, like, are they shelf stable or are they refrigerated? Or what's your shelf life? Or how do they need to be shipped, I guess? Can you frozen? Okay. Are you shipping them frozen if people order, or are you shipping them ambient? Shipped as is, no cooling. Okay. Yeah, I think that's hard. And the other thing you really want to think about too when it comes to fulfillment is the cost of moving it from your co-packer to whatever facility is you're shipping from also needs to be considered, right? Or if, for example, you have a co-packer and then you're shipping a pallet of product to ShipBob to go send product out for you on your behalf, you need to think about the cost of sending that pallet of product to ShipBob every time you do production. ShipBob is just a 3PL service that basically syncs to your website, to ShipStation, Shopify, Squarespace, etc., and fulfills orders on your behalf, but obviously at a cost. As you're typing in the chat, I'll just go through these other two questions, or this last question of, do I include kitchen rent in my labor? So this is, I'm not an accountant, and some accountants might argue otherwise. I think about kitchen rent Either if it is a fixed cost and you're paying $1,000 a month for a commercial kitchen, regardless of how much you use it, whether you use 1 hour or 100 hours a week or a month. If that is the case, I treat it as rent, sort of below the line. If you are paying for your kitchen on an hourly basis, based on how much you use it and how much you're producing, so you pay $35 an hour to use the space, then that $35 an hour would go into your, then I think about that more as like a labor cost for your product, because it's more variable based on your production. So if your production goes up in a given month, you have to pay more, whereas if it's a fixed cost, you pay the same regardless. So any questions on labor? In general, I'll also say, I think one of the best ways to think about this is to step back and say, if I go on vacation for a week and somebody needs to do production for me, how much would it cost that person to go and do everything they need to do to make a batch, and how much could they make, during that time? And if you use that as your like worst case scenario, then you're going to be the most sort of conservative about how much your product actually costs to make, because that's kind of what happens when you move to a co-packer and you have to pay somebody to completely do everything sort of for you. Okay, any other questions about costs, labor, shipping, ingredients, hard goods? All right, maybe Lane, let's keep going. Okay, right. So I just mentioned this from start to finish. Okay, so far we've talked about cost. We haven't talked about pricing strategy. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, but I'd love to just kind of learn from you guys, or you guys are welcome to just sort of unmute and we can have a conversation. What you guys want and need from a sort of cost and pricing perspective. Are you guys selling into food service? Are you guys looking to get into more wholesale accounts? Are you working with distributors yet? Do you want to work with distributors? Do you want to know what that looks like? Tell me more about kind of what your plans are for the channels that you're going to sell into, and where you have sort of gaps in terms of kind of what information you're unsure about, or things like that. Yeah, feel free to unmute.
Okay. Sorry, there's a really loud airplane going over me right now. I think I am kind of like in an in-between space of everyone, in the fact that like I make a gift box. So what I make is not like an everyday thing. Buy a scone or whatever. It's more of like a specialty product. I'm in the process of moving full into a co-packer, which basically I will be there physically, kind of overseeing it. So it's like I'm running my own commercial kitchen, but I'm not spending the $3,000, $4,000 rent for a commercial kitchen plus staffing it and so on and so forth. So right now I'm in the process of handing it off, the actual facilitating of the goods, so I can scale the amount of cookies being made so I can wholesale to specialty stores. But my specialty stores aren't like Gelson's or, well, maybe Erewhon, but more like a boutique or like Nordstrom's or Bergdorf Goodman. I make a very specialty project, so I'm in this weird niche that's like really gray. So I'm having trouble doing that connection.
Sure. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, we also have a very niche product in terms of where we can sell it, thinking about our price point, thinking about the education required for the product, all of that. And so I think for you, Jody, it's going to be about making sure that the channels you're selling it into are the right places for your product. And you're right, like you might not be selling at Whole Foods or you know, a random like bodega or something like that, right? And so, and you, depending on your shelf life, for you, the distributor that you end up using in the future, if you use one, will likely be more of a food service or like gourmet product distributor, but they'll need to have freezer storage or frozen storage in order to like be able to, in order for it to make sense for you, so that they're not going through, you know, so that you're not having to give them product every 2 days because of your or shelf. You said 3 months or you said 2 weeks?
Which one, the frozen portion? I say,
Well, I guess, yeah.
when someone receives the cookies, I say that they can ship them for up to 3 months, but if they just leave them out, it's a week and a half.
I see.
I'm having issues with my food scientists, and
Got
so
it. Got it.
I haven't been able to sort that out. Do you have any experience with like Goldbelly or any of those kinds of companies?
We have not sold through them. There's a lot of brands that we work with in Retail Ready that sell through like Good Eggs. Goldbelly, my understanding about their business model is it's basically like a 50% margin. And but I don't know how they manage fulfillment for that. If it's just like the restaurant or whoever it is gets the order and ships it out, but it's like listed on Goldbelly site, or if Goldbelly carries any sort of inventory depending on the product. I know most of the products are not like inventoriable, but
They reached out to me in the very beginning, and it was just like, this is just too much. So I didn't know.
yeah.
No, they've come a long way. I've come a long way, but I've never heard of Good Eggs.
Yeah, Good Eggs might be more Bay Area focused, but they are a like higher end grocery delivery service. Think of it like as a smaller like Thrive Market kind of thing. Yeah, so for you, I think when you think about your pricing strategy, right? If most of your sales right now come from direct to consumer.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've tried like farmers markets. It just doesn't make sense because again, like someone's not going to necessarily buy a big cookie, that's gemmed up just because it's Saturday and they feel like eating a cookie. There are definitely those people, but it doesn't make the most sense
Sure.
for the genesis.
Got it. Yeah. And so for you, then I think you just need to figure out whether it's worth it for you to sell to an Erewhon or something like that, where basically you're going to have to, retailers in general take a 40% margin, maybe 50 in your case, especially with the kinds of retailers that you're going to be working with that are a little more boutique. So, you sell it to them for 5, they sell it for 10.
It's like the fashion industry. It's exactly the same
Yeah.
in that respect. Okay, I didn't know if there was a differentiation for food.
And so, and that's if you're selling it to them directly. If you're selling to them through a distributor, then, the distributor takes 15 to 20% as
like
well.
The scale, finding the sweet spot.
Yeah. But then also, obviously, when it comes to grocery, there's a different, and again, depending on how much of a consumer base you already have that shops at Erewhon, right? you need to figure out how to get your product to move off the shelf, because getting it on the shelf is actually relatively, or is like the easier part. It's getting it off the shelf and doing the marketing and the promotion and the reminding consumers that your product is there and to go buy it there, as opposed to on your website, right? And then and getting the buyer to reorder once you've kind of done all that marketing support.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. For everybody else, what's your, I don't know, tell me more about what you want to know about pricing, if anything, when it comes to distributors, brokers, retailers, margins, things like that.
So as I mentioned before, we do freeze-dried candy. It's a fairly simple process. However, the machines run for a long time. So, we have the ability to put in a load and clean the house, go do our grocery shopping. We do operate under a CFOB. And I'm under the impression that under a CFOB, you are not allowed to sell outside of the state of California, and you're also not allowed to ship. Because of that, I'm not quite sure how to do a website, so that's something that we're working on. But we also need to get that commercial license. So we have the ability to ship, to sell outside of the state of California. But due to the fact that, it takes half an hour to get a load ready, you put it in the machine and it does its thing until it's done. We're not sure if we should try to get more machines in our home. I'm not sure that you can be a commercial kitchen in our home. Would it be better for us to rent a commercial kitchen space? Would it be better to get some kind of food truck situation where we could have a few machines in there, make the candy, be able to take it out, post up wherever and sell it? We're not quite sure what the next best steps for us would be. We sell at a couple of local markets. We are in 2 small local grocery stores. They're doing well there. We're just not quite sure the best financial way to scale it.
Sure. Are you selling in farmers markets as well, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So I think when it comes to the first question is, I guess, really being honest with yourself about what the demand looks like, so you're not, over investing in equipment that you really don't need right now. So I would say don't overinvest, or don't maybe invest in equipment until you feel like you absolutely need it from a demand perspective, even if it sort of like makes your life a little easier from a time perspective, because I think it's, again, you still, it also seems like you still need to figure out the sort of like legal like situation of, we're actually not going to know what our true demand is until we're able to sell online. And so again, so for that reason too, I wouldn't want you to like buy all these other extra ovens if you all of a sudden you're like legal now and you can sell online, but like you launch your website and it's like crickets, worst case, right? And then you're like, hey, we just spent all this money on these new ovens. So I would say thinking about what the minimum viable like option is for being able to ship, nationally, or at least outside of California. And if that is, I don't know, going back to, and I would say like with these sort of cottage law or, CFO, like they're so so different, like state to state, county to county, that you know, I couldn't tell you whether or not like what you're doing is like right, or whether you could actually like get away with like doing it until you're at this much revenue and they're not going to know. So I think if there's a way that you can either find a local bakery, right, where you can use their space as like a commercial kitchen because it's already like set up, and you keep their machine in there, and maybe you pay them rent, or you pay them like to use the space. They're operating mostly in the morning and you go in there at night and you do your production, right? Or you know, sometimes like local churches have kitchens that you can use. I've heard brands doing that at the beginning. Or there's some sort of or if there's like a like legit commercial kitchen, likely that's going to be the most expensive option. But there's I would say there's plenty of restaurants that probably could use the extra income if they are willing to be flexible with their space, and if you feel like you guys can trust each other to like respect the space, so that they're not resentful of you for like taking up storage or for like leaving a mess or like whatever it is that like they're most concerned about. So that would be the next step that I would think about from a financial perspective. But in general, like not getting too worried about like your ability to produce more right now until you figure out the true demand, once you open up that door of like being able to ship. And I mean, obviously I hope that once you open that door, like things go crazy, but you know, worst case scenario, you're sold out and like people have to wait 2 days, right? It's not the end of the world. Right.
Okay. So from a pricing perspective, minus the labor, our actual costs of the candy, of our packaging is, I'd say on average, $2 a bag. Some candies are a little cheaper, some are a little more expensive. Average, we're at about $2 a bag. We sell them at the markets, 1 for $8 or 3 for $20. We are selling them to the 2 stores that we're in at a wholesale cost of $5.50 a bag. Then both stores that we're in are selling them for $8. Are we at a good price point selling them wholesale at $5.50 an hour?
An hour?
A bag?
Wholesale. What's your competition look like in terms of price point?
It's very hit or miss. We started this because we couldn't find freeze-dried candy in our local area. We are seeing some things pop up at some local 7-Elevens. They seem to be selling them for, the 7-Elevens are selling them for about $10 a bag, but what their supplier is selling them to, I don't know.
Yeah, got it. I would say from $5.50 to $8, that's a like I would expect retailers to sell it more for like $8.99. So depending on this retailer, it sounds like they either are less confident that it'll sell at $8.99, thinks that it'll sell better at $8, and so they want to do more volume and sell it at $8 instead. I think for going up to $6 for a wholesale price, that's going to bump your definitely bump your retail price from like $8.99, from $8 to more like $8.99 or $10. The other thing you want to keep in mind too is when you're when you're working with retailers, the retailers care about the delivered cost, right? So if it's $5.50 a unit, but you're also charging them $12 to ship 12 units, well, then it's actually $6.50 a unit for them. And so then they have to add their margin on top of the $6.50, not the $5.50. So just keeping that in mind when you're either making deliveries or you're shipping product to them, or if you're shipping product to them, but you're not charging them for it, or you're making deliveries, but you're not charging them for it, right? Then there is a cost there as well to the driving, the time, et cetera. And thinking about like, okay, well, if I had to hire a driver to go around and make all of our deliveries, then, you know, what would I have to pay them? How many deliveries could they make? Thinking about from that perspective, or just thinking about it from a, okay, we have a delivered price and we have an FOB price. And the FOB is freight on board. It means like they pay for the cost of shipping from your house to their store, and you can very easily calculate what that's going to cost in your local area. I think it's always good to, if you can, to ship from the beginning and either charge them shipping or bake that into your costs so that you're not spending time delivering product, ideally. It can certainly, like at the beginning, add up to as you get more accounts, it can take up a lot of time that you can't
The
spend
two
doing other
stores
things.
that we're in currently are within 5 minutes from our house.
Got it. Okay, great,
So
great.
we do just
No problem.
get what they need, take it and deliver it. But as we expand into more wholesale accounts from stores, do you think we should be charging some kind of a delivery fee?
I think it's going to be easier to ship it, to be honest. I mean, we live in Northern Virginia and in Arlington, and I ship things to DC. I don't, and it's literally like I mean, it's 6 miles away, but I mean, it's like, you know, it could be like 45 minutes, it could be 15 minutes, right? So, but I don't want to spend an hour and a half plus parking, plus maybe getting a ticket, plus, you know, to deliver a $7,550 order. I want to spend $10 to ship it and honestly pass that cost along to the retailer. And I mean, retailers are used to paying for shipping, or they're used to having a delivered cost that includes the shipping baked into it. But I just want to make sure that if your cost is $2 without labor and you're charging $5.50 a unit, and then you have to keep your price at $5.50 and absorb the shipping cost, now your true revenue is more like $4.50. And with the labor taken into account, you know, you're at a spot where, I don't know, you might not, your labor might take over, right? In general, I will say that your cost of goods sold should be 20 to 25% of your retail price.
Okay. Okay. All right. I think we choose to deliver because some of our candy is very fragile. Jolly Ranchers, a few other things, they
Interesting.
are fragile. So we prefer to deliver them just so we don't run into any issues with bags of Jolly Ranchers coming in crumbs.
Sure. And I think that's a great thing to understand. And it's also, you know, depending on what, you know, how you expand, right? Like if all of a sudden now you're shipping things around the country, like you can't really get around that to send stuff to DC, right? And so, so either it's calling out the elephant in the room and saying, hey, like, this is crumbling, like, or like basically selling it as like a crumbled freeze-dried candy or whatever it is, however you want to describe it, but so that people know to expect it kind of that way. or right, because you don't want them to, you don't want it to show up you don't want it to show up and have them be disappointed. You want them to know that this is the way it was meant to be.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Jody, sorry, just seeing this in chat. Does your wholesaler need to stay consistent with your final price? Meaning, if we as the brand sell a product for consumer 40. Okay, great question. So at the end of the day, you cannot control the retail price in the store. Every retailer is going to have a different margin that they need to run their business. And so you can kind of predict that by knowing that retailers typically are going to add, like grocery is going to add 35 to 40, specialty is going to add 40 to 50, places like Williams Sonoma and Uncommon Goods and things like that are going to add 55 to 65, depending on the account. And so at the end of the day, like it's better to, I think it's better to just have one consistent wholesale price and everybody else adds on what they need to. And you can set that price so that knowing the margins that, knowing the channel margins for each type of store, whichever one you sell 80% to, right? If you take the 80-20 rule and you sell 80% of your product to Williams Sonoma and 20% to everybody else, well, if you want it to be on the shelf for around $45, then, err on the side of the Williams Sonoma margin. If you want it to be on the shelf at $65, or if you don't care that it's on the shelf for $65 at Williams Sonoma, but you care that it's on the shelf for 45 at Erewhon, then like kind of think about your pricing strategy from a volume perspective that way, like based on which channel you're selling the most to.
I guess my question in regards to exactly what you're saying, so say Williams Sonoma sells it for 65, but you retail it for on, our website or whatever for 44, it's like then it's controlling the fact that they might sit longer on the Williams Sonoma website, and then there's like you just said, spoilage and shelf life and all the things. It's like, I guess that's kind of a tightrope you just have to try and figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, like people aren't going to do that much comparison shopping. So I think you
They go to
from
Williams
that,
Sonoma, they buy Williams Sonoma. They don't care. They don't look at things, is what you're
yeah,
saying.
exactly. Right. And so I think, in general, right, these Williams Sonoma is an example where things are relatively like more expensive than in a grocery store, right? And so people walk in and everything is like $25, $30, right? And so having something that's like 50 or 60, like, yeah, okay, like I'll splurge on that. But like if you're in a grocery store, right, and all of the cookie sets are $10 and all of a sudden yours is 45, it's gonna be like, wait, what is this? Like, right? So I think just thinking about it from a like that channel and the relative price of products around your product. I think if it sits in a similar price area as the other products, then you'll be fine. It's when it is like an outlier and like way more expensive than everything else is when it just potentially sits there if you don't have the customers, if you can't drive customer traffic to there that already buy your product, right?
Which goes back to the whole thing of I've learned that it doesn't work in certain places. I understand that my product is for other places, so that goes back.
Right.
I'm sorry, what was the Williams Sonoma? What is the percentage markup? Do you know offhand, or were you guesstimating?
No, we've worked with them before. It's I think it's, let me see, actually I know because I know what we charged them.
Do you also know, just sorry to ask all these questions that I don't know if pertain to anyone else. Do you know, does Williams Sonoma, do you ship, since you've worked with them prior, do you ship directly to Williams Sonoma and they distribute, or do they have you distribute? Because I know some other cookies that are on their website, but they wouldn't share that info with me. So,
Yeah,
meaning
we work.
the cookie brands, not Williams Sonoma.
Yeah, sure. So when Williams Sonoma, this was a couple years ago, but when they open a new location, they try to bring in local brands from that area. And we were one of the brands that they brought on for three or four stores in Virginia and Maryland. We would deliver to them through that program. I will say that there are some administrative costs associated with working with them because of their, like, I think this was with Williams Sonoma.
You were in store, not on their website, correct?
Yes, I honestly don't know if we were on their website. We were also in a gift basket that they included for the holidays, where they just ordered, like, a couple hundred like units of something for the gift basket. But usually, like, so, depending on the retailer, their online is not always the same as their in-store lineup. So you should always, like, ask to be part of both. I feel like Uncommon Goods could potentially be a good fit for you. Uncommon Goods takes a 58%.
Well, that 15 or 50? It kind of glitched.
58.
58%.
Yeah. And I think Williams Sonoma is about 60.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any final questions?
I guess my only other question is in regards to these particular things, the more visibility, meaning Williams Sonoma, Uncommon Goods, these are a very large things. So you have to think in the mindset, okay, I might be giving them 58, 60%, taking that step back, but it's the visibility and hopefully the drive behind the product, or it's like, you got to just suck it up.
Well, so there's a slight nuance between Uncommon Goods and Williams Sonoma. Uncommon Goods, there's less, and actually something to just think about with regards to the margin, right? Is that, yes, you're giving them a larger margin, but with Uncommon Goods, there's not a lot of promotion that goes along with it. You're not doing demos. You're not, like, doing, like, in-store promotions, right? Because it's all digital. So they do most of the advertising for you. So from that perspective, you're getting less upfront, but yes, there's potentially more volume with Uncommon Goods. In general, though, right? Ideally, people know about you first before you are in store, so that people are, like, searching for you. But also, doing, especially if you're selling online right now, doing a bunch of post-purchase surveys about where people shop already, so that you're not guessing where they shop or making assumptions about where they shop, and you're focusing on selling in the places where they actually shop and not where you think they might shop. And so just, like, asking them.
That actually, I never thought of those survey things, but I just watched on Side Hustle on Ruko, which might be a really good thing for all of us to watch. I just watched the whole thing, but they literally went out and took surveys like that, and I never even thought of that because I don't know, from my standpoint, I just assumed, oh, it's all traffic from word of mouth or Instagram or like discovery feeds or, you know, person to person. So it's interesting to think about that connect of what stores they're in so you could find that right person to find your consumer. It's
Well,
awesome.
and actually like where they found you, right? And you're going to get some data from your website about referral traffic. You know, ShipStation, or I mean, Shopify and Squarespace both have that like backend analytic data. But you know, that doesn't necessarily tell you exactly where they found you in the first place. And so obviously, like if everybody is just, hey, I just Googled your name or whatever, then I don't know, they had to find out about you from somewhere, but it also lets you focus your marketing efforts on the places where people find you the most. And like, let's say you're spending all this time on Instagram, but actually nobody found you on Instagram, then like it's hard to know if it was an effective use of your time or not. Because sometimes social media, it's like the ROI is really hard to track because there's not always like a call to action to say like purchase now. It's more like awareness sometimes, right? But I think, yeah, using the surveys to figure out where people found you and to getting to know people so you know like who they are and to tweak your messaging so that you can get them to talk about your product the way that they perceive it, right? Because as brands, we have a vision of what we think our brand like is, and we try to project that, and consumers perceive it in a certain way, and we want those two things to align. And usually at the beginning, like the way that we project it is not necessarily how people perceive it. And so really trying to understand, you know, oh, like I make ice cream sandwiches with your cookies every time I buy them. And if you're not talking about ice cream sandwiches, then like you're missing your audience, right? For example.
Do you have any other suggestions for the collective of places to push Instagram, or do you have you heard of success like with Pinterest over TikTok, or is it just case by case or?
So honestly, like ask your audience where they spend their time online on social, right? Like if all of your audience is on Facebook and you're on Pinterest, then Pinterest is not going to work, right?
When you say ask your audience online, meaning
Well, like
like,
so they purchase from you, right? So this is so only I will say followers are not important, not important, but like only people that purchase from you are important from this data collection perspective. So don't just put a survey out in whatever saying, hey, followers, like, what do you think? Because you don't know who's going to respond or why they're following you or all of that. So,
so like you're saying, make a survey on the website, send it out to all the people that subscribe to your website, and maybe give them incentive, like, oh, if you fill out the survey, you get 10% off, kind of like a movement.
so actually, I would do it. Set up an automation so that when people purchase, like an if then, like when people purchase, they receive an email that says, thank you. Would love to get to know you better. Please fill out this 2-minute survey.
Okay.
I don't think it's relevant I mean, for people that opt into your email, like your mailing list, that's like the next best relevant group after purchasers. And then followers would be like the sort of least important of those three. But yeah, people that spend money willingly without a discount, number one, or like subscription subscribers. If you do a subscription box or something, like those are your like super loyal customers. And you know, part of it too is just like understanding the like how people spend their time. Like I always use like Patagonia as an example, right? Like if you go to the Patagonia website, like you know that their target market is like adventure, like people, right? Yes, there might be a lot of like, I don't know, people in the finance world that wear Patagonia like jackets, right? But like you go to their website and you see somebody like climbing a mountain or skiing or like above the fold, like that's what you see, right? So you want to get to know like your audience and you want to know how they spend their time, right? And if they are spending time camping on the weekend, if they're spending their time shopping or like whatever they're doing, right? That's the like persona that you want to like show and project on your website, so that people can feel like connected to your brand, because brands sell, products don't.
Awesome. Thank
Right?
you.
Like everything is a commodity, right? So like look at the difference between liquid death and spindrift, right? Like same product at the end of the day, but like totally different brands.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie. We are
Yeah, of
just
course.
2 minutes away, and I just need those 2 minutes to make few announcements.
Of course.
This was really insightful as always, and it was great to catch up with you and to have you here.
Same. Thank you for having me.
I'll thank you, and I'll let you go. And guys, just another minute of your time, and then I'll also let you go.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good
Thank you,
one.
Maybelline. All right. Bye, guys.
Charlie. Let me just stop the recording.